Hi, my name is Julia Kraus, and today I'm going to be talking about the disease chickenpox. So to begin with, we're going to discuss where the name chickenpox comes from. There's two possible ways that it was derived from, and the first one is that the chickenpox the vesicles of chickenpox resemble chickpeas, but that's pretty unlikely. The more likely reason for its name is that the rash kind of resembles being pecked by a chicken. And it actually is kind of believed where the virus came from originally, is a lot of people believed that if you were pecked by a chicken, then you got it. This is not actually true, though, because chickenpox is caused by the varicella zoster virus, or VZV for short, which is a human alpha herpes virus, more specifically human alpha herpes 3. And it's one of the 8 herpes viruses, which means it can only infect humans. So it cannot transmit to animals nor come from animals, so it doesn't come from chickens. One of the things it does do is it infects mucous membranes in the upper respiratory system, and it can then spread to the nervous system. Once it's spread to the nervous system, it actually stays there for the rest of your life and tends to live there in a dormant state for years to come. So it appears when you're originally infected, the varicella zoster virus appears as chickenpox, but it lays dormant in your nervous system until it can possibly reappear as shingles in adults. So it'll stay there, and then if you become really stressed, it can reappear later. But the virus itself, the varicella zoster virus, is a double-stranded DNA virus. And the double-stranded DNA is encased in a nucleocapsid inside of a lipid-rich envelope that is filled with viral glycoproteins, as you can kind of see in the picture here of the viral glycoproteins kind of sticking out of this lipid envelope. So the history of the varicella zoster virus is we can actually find records of chickenpox all the way back to the ancient Greeks, who called it zoster. Zoster means girdle, and we believe that they called it this because it appears first kind of on your chest and back, which is kind of like your girdle area. I mean, technically it's lower, but it's close enough. But because of that, but there was also a chance that it was mixed with smallpox as well, because they tended to be mixed together until it was fully separated in the late 19th century, when they recognized that they were two different diseases. But the first documented use of the name chickenpox was in 1658. Even though this was a disease that was recognized for a very long time, the link between the disease and the virus was not suggested until 1888. But even later, it wasn't even proven that those were linked until the 1950s. This took so long because the virus does only affect humans, so it's really hard to test on, because you can't really test it. You can't test it in animals, and you can't really infect other humans because it's not really ethical to see if the virus is linked to that disease. But they were able to find the vaccine, which was introduced in 1974, and they were able to do some testings and do some trials, but they were not able to mass produce it until about 1995. They were able to do this when the DNA sequence for the varicella zoster virus was completed in 1986. So the completion of the DNA sequence kind of allowed for alterations of the DNA to make it so that it does not reproduce itself as much in the body, reproducing only about 20 times when introduced to the body through a vaccine, which is not enough infection to cause symptoms, but enough for the body to create antibodies. I'm sorry, excuse my dog. But once this altered virus vaccine was introduced, it was able to become mass-produced and widespread in 1995, with millions of children becoming vaccinated all over the U.S. And because of this vaccination, it allowed a drop in cases and death, because this was a fairly common disease, with almost every child getting chickenpox. So there were over 4 million cases in the 1990s, with about 150 deaths each year, and this dropped to about 12,000 people being infected per year since the approval of the second dose of the vaccine in 2006. Despite this, it is still a common infection, but it is definitely not something that every child gets nowadays. One of the main ways to diagnose it, and the way that they have diagnosed it through history, is the visible blisters, because it is a very obvious sign. You get the blisters and you get the rash, and it's just very obvious once you have those two that you have chickenpox. But one of the cool things that we can do today is we can identify chickenpox through PCR, which is polymerase chain reaction, which is pretty much just taking a sample from the skin, which is where like either the skin or like mucous membranes where the virus infects, and amplifying the DNA over and over again to be able to test it and to determine that it is from the varicella zoster virus. So this disease is easily transmissible. It is something that a lot of people get, especially before the vaccine. It was very common, and it was so contagious. But the main way of getting this disease is through close proximity of someone who has chickenpox. And there's even a possibility that you can get it from someone who has shingles. So if they have shingles as an adult, and it kind of forms as like a skin lesion, and that skin lesion gets like pus in it, that pus actually carries large amounts of the virus in it and can transmit to kids to be given it to them as chickenpox. So pretty much contact with blisters, pus, especially pus inside those blisters, and the mucus from like coughing and sneezing are like the main forms of it, because they tend to hang out in those mucous membranes or those pus. Those are the main places that there are large amounts of the virus. But it can also be transmitted through freshly contaminated items as well. So if like someone touches it and then someone else grabs it soon after, you can get it through that as well. Dry blisters don't contaminate though, because once it crusts over, or once it like scabs over, all the little viruses inside of that blister are dead or gone. So those ones actually don't contaminate. One of the reasons that this disease is really contagious though is that a person becomes infectious 1 to 2 days before blisters or any other like physical sign appears. So like through the coughing. So this is why it is so contagious, because people tend to spread it before they even realize that they're sick. But once the blisters do start to appear, the blisters and rash tend to appear on the chest, back, and face. These are the 3 first places that they tend to appear. And once a person is infected, it takes 10 to 24 days for a person to incubate the disease and show symptoms. So you could have it for about 3 weeks and start spreading it to people before you even know that you have it. Once you do get the disease, though, it is very rare to get it again. It's just one of those diseases that doesn't really happen twice, especially because the virus that causes chickenpox stays in the nervous system for years to come. So how the disease spreads in the body is following the original infection. The incubation time, as we talked about, is 10 to 24 days. And the virus then begins to make its way through the body by entering generally through the upper respiratory system, like the nose and the lungs and stuff like that, and the mucous membranes in there. And the mucous membranes in there are able to bring it to dendritic cells, which are believed to be the first targets of the virus. The dendritic cells then allow like the virus to kind of travel through the body towards draining regional lymph nodes like tonsils. And these lymph nodes are where the virus begins to replicate over and over and over again. This is kind of their main hangout spot per se, where they like to make more of them. And once there is a lot of the varicella zoster virus in those lymph nodes, they'll attach to T cells and infect those T cells, and those T cells then tend to transport it through the blood. This is when it gets detected by the specific immune response, and they're able to create the antibodies for it. But at that point, it's already the body's already really heavily infected by it, and it's kind of too late to prevent blistering or contamination. The T cells produce virions that are released and are sent to the dermis through ganglions that innervate the skin. So the ganglions that are in our skin, which cause us to feel things, also send the varicella zoster virus to our skin, and that's when the rash and the blisters start to appear. The virus also continues to travel through the nervous system and through the blood by infected T cells until the immune response can eliminate most of the viral particles. But not all of them will be eliminated though, because as we talked about, some of the dormant varicella zoster viruses will always kind of lie dormant in your nervous system. and can potentially reappear as shingles as an adult. So the main symptoms of chickenpox is rash and blisters, and as we talked about, that was like kind of the main way of determining if you have chickenpox for a very, very, very long time. It's kind of the rash and the blister, as you can see, like in the picture that I have here, are kind of the telltale signs that you have chickenpox. But some other things that you can get from it as well that also kind of just hint that you have chickenpox is a fever, loss of appetite, headache, and tiredness. So all of these together can really show that you do have chickenpox, or your child has chickenpox. There are certain people that are more susceptible to chickenpox than others. The main one are children. They are the ones that are most likely to get the disease because their immune system is just not as strong as adults. And that's why it's considered a childhood disease, especially because almost every child got it in like the 1950s. Especially if they're unvaccinated, they're more likely to get it. Vaccination is about 12 to 15 months. So children that are under a year are more likely to get it than those who are older. But even those who are a little bit older are still more likely to get it than any other person. Pregnant women, though, who haven't had chickenpox before also have a higher chance of becoming infected because their immune system is kind of repressed while they're pregnant, especially if they are unvaccinated. Getting infected by chickenpox as a pregnant woman can actually cause some serious birth defects for the baby, and can affect the baby so much that it actually kills the fetus before it's born. And if the woman who's having the baby gets infected by the disease right before they have the baby, it can actually transmit to the baby. And so those babies the babies are like the next ones to most likely get it because they get it from their infected mothers, and this can actually be very serious for them. People who smoke also are more likely to get it because smoking weakens the lungs, which allows the immune system to not really recognize the virus earlier when inhaled into the mucous membranes of the lungs, and so not really able to fight it off as much, even if they are vaccinated. People who have a weakened immune system are always more likely to get any disease, which is an unfortunate reality, but especially chickenpox. If they haven't been vaccinated before and they have a weakened immune system, they're more likely to get it no matter what their age. The least likely people to get it, though, are adolescents and adults, even though unvaccinated people are more likely to get it no matter their age. But even if they are vaccinated, they still can get the disease, but it tends to be not as severe if they do. If they haven't gotten it before as a child, you are more likely to get it. But even if you do get it as an adult, vaccinated or unvaccinated, it tends to be more severe as an adult than when you get it as a child. There are some major complications that can occur from getting chickenpox, and one of the main ones is the bacterial infections of the skin because of the blisters. That's pretty much an open wound on your body, and so there can be infections on that if not taken properly. There can also be some serious ones like infections of the lungs, like pneumonia, which is fluid in the lungs, and it can even cause excuse my pronunciation, but empyema, which is pus in between the lungs and the chest wall, which kind of like compresses your lungs and makes it hard to breathe. There can also be a major one of infection or swellings of the brain, which obviously is very major. It can also cause hemorrhaging, blood infections, and dehydrations. So there can be some serious complications with them. Even though these complications aren't as common, it can happen. So that's the varicella-zoster virus, which causes chickenpox in children. These are my sources, and I thank you for listening.